freedom for me meant reparations. Freedom for me means Black youth involvement, Black youth employment, equal access to education. We're in 2024, but we're having similar issues to the civil rights movement. They want to make it harder for people who look like me to vote.
Today on How She Did It, we are interviewing the co-founder of one of the largest youth-led civil rights organizations right here in New York City. She is an activist, an organizer, and was named one of 50 young trailblazers by Vogue. She is consistently on the front lines of equality advocacy and policy reform. Let's welcome Nialah Edari. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. That was a wonderful introduction.
Of course. So you're the co-founder of Freedom March. Can you tell me a little bit more about your organization and its mission?
Yes, of course. So Freedom March NYC really came to be out of the height of the George Floyd protest movement. My co-founder, Chelsea Miller, who I met in college, was out the night before on May 30th. And May 31st, I called her. I'm like, I want to do something. We need to organize something. We've heard and we've seen that there were outside agitators on May 30th. So we wanted to organize something where, one, we knew what was going on, that we feel safe and people in our community feel safe. So we called each other around 8 a.m. We had a flyer at 12 p.m. and we're like, meet us outside at 8 p.m. The flyer started going viral, not viral, what we call viral now, but for us, 300 people shared it. That was a lot. And more than 300 people came out. It would end up being one of the largest, not one of the largest, the largest protests that night, and people left feeling inspired and wanting more from us. So Freedom March NYC came to be right then and there. Right after that, we started organizing more marches. We started organizing vigils. We built a website. We decided what are the things that we are going to stand for and how do we want Freedom March NYC to support the community. So one of the main things that we did was organize with other Black women organizers across New York City. So everything that we did, it was in conjunction with other Black women. Because a lot of the times when we think about the civil rights movement, we know Martin Luther King, we know Malcolm X, and some people may know Fannie Lou Hamer, but we never ever see the women that were on the front lines. We see them on the side, or their stories are always on the side. And women are on the front line, so that's something that we wanted to promote, do, and show.
Absolutely. Okay, so Freedom March has become now this generational powerhouse of activism, but it really just started off with two friends in college. That's so amazing. I feel like many people tend to view the civil rights movement as this historic event, right? This chapter in the past that is now closed. But there is still so much work to be done in this space, right? So as an activist, what are the main issues that you are trying to solve right now with your organization?
That's a wonderful question. So we are very niche. Everything that we do is woman focused. Of course, we work across lines with any issues, but everything we do is woman focused, woman issues. Also on voting and voting accessibility, as we see we're in 2024, but we're having similar issues to the civil rights movement in terms of people being able to vote. Now, some states are requiring more IDs, not because they care about voter protections, but they want to make it harder for people who look like me to vote.
So what stands out to me about Freedom March is that it's youth-led.
Yes.
So to me, that signifies, innovation and change. So what do you think your organization is doing differently from other social impact organizations?
That's a good question. Let me answer, make sure I don't get spicy. One of the main things that we thought was very important, as I mentioned earlier, how we wanted to build a coalition of other Black women. We didn't want to necessarily be a national chapter. We understand that how people organize in Minnesota may be different how you organize in New York, how people organize in Illinois may be different how you organize in California. So instead of having Freedom March Chicago, Freedom March Minneapolis, we just work and support people where we can. And I think that makes us different because instead of saying here to another group of young people, this is how you should do this, we may provide resources and support how you want to move within your city, your district, or your state. And I think a lot of it is part of like decentralizing leadership. there's 20 leaders, not one leader leading 19 people, but there's 20 of us. And that's how we like to look at things.
Yeah. Even freedom, the word freedom is so representative of younger generations because the concept of freedom within civil rights, I think, also resonates deeply with like Gen Z and the aspirations and the values of the younger generations. So how do you think the concept of freedom really aligns with younger generations?
Well, one thing I've learned in doing this work, even in consulting, is that the Gen Z generation, they do not play. So brands know when they're putting out a new product, when they're thinking about their brand narrative, that they need to be equitable if they want Gen Z supporters. Gen Z cares about the climate. Gen Z cares about LGBTQ. Gen Z cares about health and voting. So that's very important. Like, you need to make sure what you're doing is equitable, because Gen Z is not a generation of whatever. Like, because of Gen Z, they're calling things out. People are changing and shifting because Gen Z is the generation that does not play that, even within the workplace.
Yep, absolutely.
They do not play.
How do you keep...
I'm Gen Z adjacent.
Yeah.
Millennial.
I love that. How do you keep freedom at the forefront of your mission?
That's a good question. I have to think on that. What do you mean by that?
Because your organization is called Freedom March, right? So what does freedom mean to you, and what did it mean to you in even starting this entire organization?
That is such a good question, because I remember asking different people that on Juneteenth. So Freedom March, the name was just, I think it was random at first, because we organized this march in less than 24 hours. We wrote Freedom March on a cardboard, and at the end of the march, we'd be like, who are you guys? And we're like, we're Freedom March NYC. And then later down the line, we had to just develop, what does this mean to us? Just like you're asking, what does this mean to us? And freedom for me meant reparations. Freedom for me means Black youth involvement, Black youth employment, equal access to education. And overall, which Chelsea will tell you this and other people will tell you this, is wellness, taking care of yourself. How we want to move a little bit differently than our leaders in the past is, you cannot come outside, or you cannot do this work if you don't bring your best foot forward, meaning you cannot do this work if you don't bring your best self forward. So you need to take care of yourself. Like, one of my favorite Instagram accounts to follow during that time, and even now, is the NAP ministry. Like, rest, lay down. And that is freedom. Yeah. Being able to rest is freedom.
Absolutely. So like you said before, this entire journey of your organization started with the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. And then recently we had the death of Sonia Massey, which I think has reinvigorated this years-long fight for, you know, police reform and racial justice in general. And I think it was really devastating, really disappointing for us all. But as an activist, how do these repeated instances of violence and injustice impact your motivation and your sense of purpose in your work?
It actually gets very tiring, exhausting, and it can be depressing, especially when you're dealing with death. And then beyond death, you're dealing with people determining, is this person's life worthy? Should they receive justice? There are cameras. Did this happen on camera? Did they cause their own death? So making sure that I check in, but also working across the board with other organizers to support whatever they need or whatever anyone needs.
So you're also an advisor for the Next 50, which is an organization dedicated to the next generation of political leaders. And I think it's so interesting to think about what the next generation of politicians will look like. So what do you think the next generation of leaders will bring to the political space?
Well, they will be younger, hopefully, innovative, bringing fresh new ideas, and also from their experiences. So the way that young people, or that we are experiencing climate change, is a lot different than our grandparents and our great-grandparents. Like, these issues are a matter of life or death. And we're thinking not just for ourselves, but the future generation. I think that's why it's really, really important that we have more young people in office, because they bring a new perspective and a different point of view.
For sure, and a sense of urgency, because we're like going through this right now.
I don't want to have to learn how to swim really well in order to live in New York, because it may be flooded in a couple of years.
As an advisor for this organization, what specific strategies are you using to invest in the next generation of political leaders?
Thank you for asking that. So one of the things that I think is very important and that I do on my own is a digital strategy. So as you know, you're on Instagram, you're on TikTok. TikTok has the youngest audience. Both presidential candidates have just gotten on TikTok. They weren't on there before, but they know that in order to meet younger people where they are, they need to be on TikTok. So one of the strategies that I use is meeting young people where they are, which is on TikTok, creating content on TikTok or Instagram, because that's where a younger audience is. You can't go on, cable TV expecting to reach a certain people or a certain demographic that is not subscribe to cable. Meeting people where they are is really important and a really important strategy to do youth outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the next generation, according to Fortune magazine, half of Gen Z do not intend to vote in this upcoming election.
That is so crazy.
Which is really, really concerning.
We have to change that.
I know. And how do you interpret this? Why do you think Gen Z is less politically engaged?
Well, fortunately, I only see people that are politically engaged. However, it is very important that I'm aware that they aren't, because I need to make sure I'm doing things to get them interested to change that. Like, that statistic is very, very alarming. As we talked about earlier, climate change will affect Gen Z and the future generation the most. Why they aren't engaged? They're not engaged for real?
Yeah, it's crazy.
When was it?
It's actually over half.
Over half?
Yeah, it's crazy.
When is this dated?
This was, I can't remember, I don't know when, but Fortune magazine released an article recently.
Was this pre-July 2024?
No, post.
Just post?
Yeah.
Even after a new candidate?
Yeah. What strategies do you think could be helpful to help encourage young people to get out and vote?
As I said, definitely meeting people where they are on social media. One of the things that Chelsea and I did during the Senate campaign in Georgia, we were at the clubs. We were at the clubs with voter registration signs, QR codes, talking about abortion, talking about issues that may connect the people that were there so they would scan and register to vote. So, you need to meet people where they are. Where these people who don't care, we have to think about what are things that they may care about. Maybe abortion isn't something they care about. Maybe climate change isn't something they care about, but they should care about. So how can we make it in a matter that speaks to them?
Yeah.
So when we speak about abortion, it may not necessarily just be abortion, but women health care. People are dying because they don't have an access to abortion. Doctors are not operating on people for fear that it may count as an abortion. So basic women's health is in jeopardy. Things like that. Okay, you don't care about the climate, but the air quality where you live may be getting worse. Here are some diseases that have developed because of whatever pollution is in your neighborhood, and flooding may happen in X amount of years, and you want children?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I think you gotta, not necessarily instilling fear, but listing out some things that can connect with those people who aren't interested in voting. Because something connects to them somewhere.
Yeah.
And maybe what they see on TV or what they are currently seeing is not as easily digestible as it should be, but making it easily digestible, breaking it down for them.
Yeah.
Because these things affect you. Like, you need to go out and vote.
Yeah.
And down the ballot, I know when people think of the president, oh, well, this person has been president, this person has been president, my life hasn't changed, I didn't get student loans. Those are very valid questions, very valid concerns. We didn't get our student loans because Republicans and states sued and the Supreme Court ruled that is unconstitutional. You may not be able to have access to an abortion because of your state representatives in your state. So we need to vote down the ballot and be aware of who is running for office locally, within city government, also in your state government. It's equally as important, if not more, than presidential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of meeting people where they're at and putting things in their face. We've seen Kamala Harris employing a lot of really smart campaign strategies, especially her use of TikTok, because she's trying to appeal to Gen Z, and this is where young people are increasingly getting their news. And another interesting statistic that has come from this upcoming election is that the next generation is actually moving away from identity politics. So in other words, like, Gen Z is not just going to vote for somebody based off of a shared race or a shared ethnicity or gender or any identity for that matter. In fact, a study from UCLA indicated that 82% of Gen Zers actually support Kamala Harris for reasons completely separate from her race or her gender. So do you personally agree with this? And how do findings like this affect your work both as a political advisor and an activist?
I definitely agree with this, and I would hope that Gen Z, or anyone for that matter, is voting based on policy and not identity, because whether someone's a woman or they're Black, that may not, although that representation is very nice to see, that's not going to change your life. It's the policies that they're implementing, and I think that Gen Z supports her probably because her policies are more progressive than Donald Trump's.
Exactly. I love the fact that Gen Z didn't just automatically support Kamala Harris just because she's a Black woman. And I think that just goes to show that for younger generations, like diversity is the norm. It's not an exception. You know, like we grew up seeing the Obamas in the White House.
Which is so beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And as historic as that was and still is, I think it just made us a lot more discerning and a lot more critical of our representatives, as we should be, because we prioritize like values and actions above mere identity. So I think that's really cool. What role do you think organizations like yours play in shaping these conversations around representation and accountability?
I would say a role that we play is one, making sure there's more youth representation. So one of the things that we did when we started Freedom March NYC is pushing to implement like a youth advocacy board within city government, looking at what already exists in other cities and how we can do that in New York. It's not necessarily identity politics, it is youth representation, but youth come with different policies, or they come with policies that directly speak to their perspective and point of view, as we stated earlier.
Exactly. So you also attended the NATO Youth Summit as a delegate, and you spoke out about the youth crisis pertaining to Sudanese refugees as well as young people in Senegal. And I think sometimes with activism, it's so easy for us to get so wrapped up in our little United States bubble. So how do you think that we can, as youth activists, connect better with global issues?
Yeah, I think it's important that we amplify each other because we're all connected. When you think about the South African apartheid movement, a lot of those leaders said that they were inspired by what happened earlier in the United States and our movement. So we all work together. October 2021, when the NSARS movement were happening in Nigeria, a lot of people reach out to us, how can you help support us? So we make sure to amplify their messages, because we're all connected at the end of the day, and sometimes we have a shared issue with police brutality. I know NSARS was different than it is in the US, but bottom line was police doing too much.
Yeah, exactly.
In Nigeria.
Yeah, so.
And affecting youth day to day.
Yeah. What steps do you think we can do to ensure that we are being inclusive with our activism and considering the experiences of young people all around the world?
I think that we can, one, make sure that we're good listeners. So what we do in the US is different than what they may do in Senegal. So if the Senegalese youth activists are listing these issues, then the best thing that we can do is amplify their message instead of trying to change it or adjust it to our liking or how we do things here. I think amplification, even though it's so small, it can be such a big deal, because a lot of the times when people don't share what's going on, people don't know that it's happening. So anytime you can, talk about what's going on in Sudan, talk about what's going on in Congo. Like, talk about it.
Yeah.
Share, amplify it. Who are the leaders in Congo? Who are the leaders in Sudan that we can show support to?
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier you mentioned mental health as well, and I want to get into activist burnout, which is a huge concern for people who are involved in social impact movements. How do you prioritize wellness and self-care in your line of work?
Yeah, wellness is very, very, very important to me. Activist burnout is very, 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 very real. We see a lot of people may have been active in the streets and then we haven't heard from them since. Not because they aren't doing anything, because that they are burnt out, that they weren't able to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do when we were building out Freedom March NYC is having a wellness component. So we worked with a major wellness brand. We hosted a wellness retreat to take care of other activists within New York City, so they're able to just have a weekend of doing nothing.
Yeah.
And outside of just doing big events like that, on my own, I make sure to rest. I keep an active lifestyle. I do Pilates. I do hot yoga. I'm making sure I'm drinking my water and checking in with my friends that they're taking care of themselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were telling me about the space that you started on TikTok that is mostly for yourself as well. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I have my Instagram, which you follow, and my TikTok, which is my middle name, Rukia. And I started my TikTok, Uptown Hottie One, really to be an avenue where there wasn't anything related to activism because it got tiring. I know it's tiring to be a Black person in America, period. But every time something happens, people expect you to respond, which makes sense, but it also can be hurtful because you're like, people are dying and this is our real life. So TikTok was my escape from that, where I just wanted to talk about, fashion, or I'm into surfing, so I talk about surfing or travel or just things that aren't related to my identity, because when people see me, it's automatically identity. I just want it to be a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so powerful too, just as a Black woman, having the space to just care about yourself.
Yeah, the space to just be.
Yeah, to just be and to explore new hobbies, you know, and not be so burnt out all the time by the things that we're doing for others. So I really love that for you. How do you approach mental health, both for yourself and the people that you advocate for?
Well, one, for myself, as I mentioned earlier, I make sure to take time, rest when I need to, and take the necessary breaks when I need to. And for others, as I also mentioned earlier, we hosted wellness retreats, inviting people that, not just in our organization, but throughout New York City, who can benefit from taking some time to themselves to attending a wellness retreat. And also, like, one of the Instagram accounts that I follow, and I followed her since I was in college, and now we're friends. Shout out Elise at Sad Girls Club. That has been very helpful for my journey dealing with postgraduate depression, even to now, because they're always hosting events, just like taking some mental time to yourself.
And I love that, because I wanted to ask you, you started out your organization with your co-founder. It started off with two friends who just wanted to make a difference on their college campus, but grew to so much more than that, right? And how do you feel that that is a testament to the power of friendship and community? Yeah,
well, we're still friends, and the organization still exists, and we're basically more like sisters now. Like, we were locked in. I think being able to start something beautiful with your college friend who shares the same ideals and morals as you is amazing. It also just speaks to how important female friendship is, how important Black girlhood is, how important Black womanhood is. She's also my sorority sister. We're both AKAs, and I think being a part of that sorority has also shaped us into the women who we are, and being able to work together and being able to lead a movement and an organization. Yeah, absolutely. So to close out this interview, what advice do you have for young women in the civil rights and social impact spaces? Yeah. One, I would say that it may get hard, especially when you're dealing with some legacy organizations, but the first thing I would say is stay the course, and if you can't find your lane, build it. That's what Chelsea and I did, is we built our own lane. We were showing up to marches, like this. This is what we look like. This is who we are. And I've never, ever felt so comfortable in a space before where I can be free of being sexualized, because I'm in a community amongst women. Yeah. So I would definitely say stay the course and build what you don't see. I love that. Thank you so much, Nialah. Well, thank you for having me. Insight, of course. And thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to check the description for more information. And as always, tune in next week for another all-new episode of How She Did It.